This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
A real-life look at homicide with authors Richard Hough and Kimberly McCorkle on this edition of Conversations. This will likely come as no surprise, but the way the media and movies portray murder in America may not quite match reality. Authors and professors Richard Hough and Kimberly McCorkle have written a book that dispels some of the myths and beliefs that we have about homicide. In American Homicide, they unlock the actual facts about murder versus what the media would have us believe. Both have vast experience in criminal justice as practitioners, teachers, and researchers. Dr. Richard Hough has been teaching criminal justice and related courses for over 25 years. In addition, he has worked for and consulted a wide range of law enforcement agencies, including the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice. He has a master's degree from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and a doctorate from the University of West Florida, where he currently serves as a faculty member. Dr. Kimberly McCorkle has worked as both an assistant state attorney and assistant public defender. She has focused a good bit of her career on domestic violence crimes. She has an undergraduate degree from Louisiana State University and her Juris Doctorate from the University of Florida, Frederick G. Levin College of Law. Currently, she's an associate dean and professor at the University of West Florida. Thank you both for joining us. Fascinating topic that you have written about. I'll ask you a question here. Why as a society and why as the media, why are we so fascinated with homicide?
It's probably the biggest question that we help people through. And everything from student groups, obviously, that we talk to in the classes, but also in civic groups that we go out and chat with. The fascination comes from a variety of things, including the more we know about something, perhaps the less scared we have to be about it. There is the so-called morbid fascination of seeing something terrible and tragic, and people get that pull and then think, is there something wrong with me? Generally speaking, for everybody, no, that doesn't mean there's anything, wrong with you. It is a fascinating part of the, that dark part of the psyche, the big question of why. Why would somebody do this? Why would people do a particular type of homicide? And so the fascination, you only have to look as far as the movies or what's on the lineup on tonight's television programs to see it. It has been with us and will stay with us.
Well, think about some of the shows, particularly like, for example, the Nancy Grace show. The whole show is built around crime and whatnot. And so it just seems like there's an over-the-top fascination with it.
There is. And as Richard said, the media covers it all the time, and I think adds to the fascination that we have. We want to understand it. Why do people commit the most serious type of crime that exists? And I think it's this kind of quest to understand it that really causes people to seek out programs about it, to watch it on TV, to kind of seek out fictional accounts of it. And we're asked about it all the time as faculty members who work in a criminal justice setting where students just want to know, what is it that causes someone to commit this type of crime? We try to understand it.
Yeah. Well, what does cause someone? Why does somebody kill somebody?
Sure. And you break that up in a number of different things. You mentioned, for instance, like the Nancy Grace show and looking at news or infotainment, of course,
Right.
We've pretty much seen since the 24/7 news cycle came into being 24 years or 20 or so years ago. And that a lot of those, because it generates so much coverage, recoverage, and rehashing it on a daily basis in the cycle, also makes people think there's more of it than what there is. As to the question about why, it's broken down into a number of categories. The largest category of murder in this country and in most is what's called confrontational homicide. You and I run into each other at a bar, literally physically bump into each other. One of us gets offended, the other one raises the stakes a little bit, and it escalates because men have that within them to act stupidly in that way. A lot of times younger men, more often. Certainly in the areas of intimate partner homicide and domestic violence, where as a result of a complex set of dynamics that even most of the people involved in it don't recognize, that's another category. And then there are, that small segment that we get a disproportional amount of attention to. Cult killings, mass killings, school shootings, things that are incredibly tragic, very dramatic, might take up a couple of victims or multiple victims, but are very, very rare. And so it's, to paraphrase a variety of people through the ages, a lot of homicide is very mundane. It is, unfortunately, normal people acting abnormally in the moment. You know, everyone has the capacity for violence based on any one of a number of things, but the part about murder continues to be much about young men, you know, with one another, and then to the next largest category, the intimate partner and family homicide.
Let me come back and ask you about that, because you're talking about the situation. You bump into somebody at a bar, somebody pulls out in front of you, you get, you know, something along those lines. And I've often wondered, okay, I can understand maybe a fist fight breaking out, but to take someone's life over that, I mean, you're going to a whole different level. Is that person, I mean, is there something mentally that just snaps, or is there something mentally wrong with them that's been there for a long time?
Right, and it's a question that's asked all the time. And I was going to say, whenever you ask the question about kind of what causes it, a lot of people go to the explanation that someone must be mentally ill. And in fact, the statistics suggest that that's not usually the case. So in the instance of a confrontational homicide, for instance, it is the escalation of anger. Think of confrontational homicide, for instance, as happening in a road rage incident, right? And we hear about those all the time. But two motorists get into a heated exchange because someone cuts someone else off, and they pull off on the side of the road, and words are exchanged, and the next thing you know, these people did not intend or come to this incident thinking that they were going to kill someone, but the argument escalates. Maybe one of them has a weapon in the car, maybe both of them do, right? They retrieve the weapon from their car, and then a homicide occurs in the heat of an exchange like that is not planned. It's not caused by mental illness, but it's caused by factors that we know that exist, which is, as Richard suggested, a lot of times between young men. That's what the research tends to suggest. Maybe there's been the presence of alcohol, right? But a lot of times it is this heated exchange that just kind of occurs for a lot of reasons, but we think part of it is because sometimes people don't have the ability to kind of control the anger, to de-escalate the conflict, to walk away from the conflict, right?
One of the biggest reasons for that, Jeff, it's really interesting, and there's been a pretty good amount of research on this over the years, is the audience factor. And so whether it's us on the playground as kids and, you know, a couple guys usually exchange a punch, and then everybody else crowds around and goes, fight, fight, fight. We'd like to think we grow out of that, and maybe at a certain point we do, but in many of these ways we do not. So whether it's at a neighborhood barbecue, whether it's at a bar where, again, as Kimberly said, there's alcohol involved in the mix there, and saving face in front of others, when that dynamic gets in there, then there's no place in the mind of the, you know, the two combatants to kind of back away and de-escalate and step away from that. Who's going to do that? You see these instances where somebody goes away, finds a weapon, comes back to a party that they were either kicked out of or somebody insulted them, and it kind of goes that way. Again, from the standpoint of men, and this is always a good laugh line for the ladies in our classes, you know, we say, well, you know, women mature faster than men, and they do. And one of the examples of that is the fact that the prefrontal cortex of the brain, where most of the executive functions, decision-making, impulse control, that doesn't finish cooking in men till about the mid-20s. Okay. And so we're already, you know, dealing with, this is, any parent will look at their insurance rates for their teenage kids and know there's a reason for that, because the auto industry knows that there's a higher risk of the driving behavior. We've been doing some interesting, you know, just very low-level survey with our classes over the last couple of years, where about partway into the homicide course, we'll ask the students things such as, in the last 3 months, has anybody honked at you in traffic, flashed their lights, tailgated you, swerved at you, yelled at you, made gestures? And then we ask the same question, have you done that? And just to kind of sensitize them as we go into the talk about confrontational violence. And almost unanimously in the last 2-3 years, everyone says yes. The male students, the female students, again, a population traditionally of about 21 to 25 or 6 years of age. And again, then we tell them, okay, you're normal in terms of getting frustrated in a frustrating situation, but now let's talk about how that can escalate to, you know, murder.
Yeah.
And fortunately, what we know is that it escalates very rarely, because homicide is a rare event. Even confrontational homicide, which Richard mentioned, is the most commonly perpetrated type of homicide, they don't occur all the time. They don't occur at a high rate, right? And so we know that most people who might have a little bit of road rage are not going to have a situation that escalates into a homicide, thankfully. But what we do know is about the ones that actually where homicide occurs is that they have some things in common many times. So for instance, there's the presence of a weapon, which will increase the likelihood that a homicide could occur. As we also mentioned, the presence of alcohol. So at a bar situation, in the parking lot of a bar or something like that, if the parties have been drinking, then it's more likely to escalate. And so, and when young men are involved. Statistically, those are the factors that suggest that this incident could escalate to a homicide.
Which brings me to the question, so many states have the, concealed weapons permits. Is there research that indicates homicides are higher in states that have, shall we say, more liberal gun laws than others?
There's a ton of this kind of research. Some of it's conflicting. Some of it you have to look back to what is the entity who claims that it's actually research versus someone putting a political agenda forward. What we know is that firearms are used in well over 3/4 of all murders. Accidental shootings of children on a yearly basis and the deaths of children on a yearly basis in this country are staggering. That anytime there's a weapon present, there's the potential for escalation. After even the legislation in Florida, one of the first to do the so-called stand your ground legislation, we saw scores of instances where if you and I are in conflict and one of us has a firearm and we later assert that I felt in fear for my life, a law would provide a certain amount of protection for that individual if even factually the person was not, there was no indication that that would have, put someone in true fear of their actual life. So, yeah, there's not been enough in place in terms of legislation in most places to determine whether the laws have an impact. We absolutely, without any question, know the presence of firearms. Just hands down for decades, it's clear that tremendously correlates, with homicide, and it's a tragic thing. We don't even enter into kind of first of all, a university and with researchers like us, it's not about debates and opinions. It's about what are the facts, show us, what does the research tell us. And when you look at the research, which is also why we don't, go into letting students write, research papers on it, because a lot of times it'll come down to, well, I don't like it or I do like it. I'm sorry, this is a university. Tell us the facts. What does this tell us? And we also know there's more firearms in America than there are adults. And so we know that for someone in a premeditated situation who wants to go get a weapon and come back and harm another person, they can obtain one. But as we just pointed out at the opening of the program, the single largest category of homicide is confrontational. We run into each other, it escalates. I hit you with something, you hit me with a chair, I pull out a knife, you pull out a gun, this is done.
Gotcha.
And the factor of what's called victim precipitation, we often find that, not to be confused with victim blaming, but if the two people interact and they fight, the one who started it may end up being the one killed. It doesn't mean they deserve to be killed, but there's very often, contributing on both sides, which is also why research shows us that in many homicides that there's a lot of demographic matching of the two individuals. And a lot of times there's criminal background matching. Once again, far stretch from saying anybody deserved or, oh, well, it's no big deal that they died. It's horribly tragic when anybody dies, but we're less surprised at some of these situations as opposed to, and we usually make a mention of this, homicide, the rate of homicide in the United States is half of what it was 20 years ago.
Half.
Homicide, half. Homicide is not a frequent occurrence. It is not, people, with homicide ever increasing in crime. We're in a 20-year crime decline in the U.S. Homicide, half the rate of what it was. Unfortunately, clearance rates are also down. In the 1960s, we cleared about 90% of homicides. Now it's about 62%. That doesn't mean, okay, I'm less likely to be killed, but the killer's less likely to be caught. Most of those are caught up in these confrontational ones, gangbangers, sometimes where there's no witness or a witness who won't come, and look. So whatever television program we want to use as an example. If I'm home watching Murder, She Wrote on Friday night, I'm not really in any danger. But if I'm out clubbing at 2:30 in the morning when things are breaking up and there's a lot of alcohol, now there's more risk. So it's who you are, where you are, what you are.
I'm curious, why has the number of homicides gone down over the past 20 some odd years?
So researchers have spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, right? And as Richard said, crime rates are declining. And again, that's contrary to what people will think and what people think because of the news cycle, the 24/7 news cycle. We are surrounded by news stories all the time about terrible things occurring.
Yeah.
And what those news stories fail to do is to kind of set the context to say, this is extremely rare, right? And that, that crime is in a 20-year decline, that homicide is in a decline. I think, you know, we've spoken to that a little bit in the book, and I think you can speak to that a little bit as well. That
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a couple of different things. Economy, you know, plays in.
Right.
First of all, no silver bullet, no pun intended, no single answer because we humans, we're complicated, messy kind of creatures. But what we do know is with reduction in, you know, certain of the issues of the economy, that's in there societally just kinder, gentler, more open, measured on a variety of different things. The great Harvard psychologist Steven Pinker wrote a tremendous book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why We're Living in the Least Violent Times in History. Worldwide, and this is always a shock to the viewers, shock to hear this, this is the least violent time in all of human history.
Really?
Right, and it's like, so then you thought, well, how is that possible when I just saw this or that in South America, Europe, Middle East, et cetera? Well, you go back and you look at how disorderly countries were and they were constantly warring. Now, it's, of course, a great concern when it happens, and it is happening now, but in so many fewer places. The rule of law in countries is so much more, you know, entrenched and ingrained, and it's there. And so the cry from us as professors and researchers always is, look up the facts before, you know, launching into a conversation. We tell the students, you're now empowered to go out and, you know, kind of spread facts and knowledge and say, have you ever looked at, you know, some of the actual, you know, statistics kind of thing. So
yeah, because I would be willing to bet you lunch that if we were to go out and ask the average person, maybe in our age range, the response would be, boy, things are a lot different than when I was growing up.
Yes.
It's, you know, that type,
right.
you know, and we're
All
not
the
that
time.
old. I mean,
Right.
you know.
Right. Yeah, the perception is that it's happening with more frequency, and the truth is it's not. If you look at some violent murder rates in the 1980s and early 90s, for instance, that were quite high, that we've gone down a lot since then. And so, and some of the theories also have to do with better enforcement of laws, right? That we're enforcing our laws, and that people are incarcerated. That we have better awareness.
some of the intelligence-led policing with the data, you know, work and everything. In later this summer, we're going to be at the British Society of Criminology in Nottingham, England, talking about a comparison of the United Kingdom, the UK, and the US, specifically in homicide, but also homicide investigative practices. You know, trying to figure out the whodunits from what we call the dunkers, the slam dunkers. Right. We know who did it, period, versus where are the real mysteries. And it's interesting, we're going to be meeting, a day-long meeting with one of the most storied investigators in all of the UK, and over his career he investigated, you know, some 350 to 400 homicides. That's over 40 years. When I was a homicide detective in the mid-'80s in South Florida, probably in just about a 2-year period, I had about 50.
Wow.
And so when we talk to our colleagues in some countries, they're mystified at how we deal with homicide because we've had more. But if you look internationally, South America, Central America, we're dwarfed in our homicide numbers. We have a rate right now about 4.5 per 100,000. And like I said, it was over 12 per 100,000 20 years ago. But Colombia, Peru, Guatemala, I mean, you're talking about numbers from 20 to 92 per 100,000. We have 4.
Wow.
Homicide, rare occurrence. We think about flying, right? Flying still the safest form of travel.
Right.
But when a plane goes down, a lot of people are killed at once. It is covered ad nauseum, and it's the implication is I better not get on a plane
Right.
when that's the farthest thing from the truth.
Right. Let me move on because of time issues on domestic violence. I know you've spent a good bit of your career specializing in that area. What drives that situation to homicide level?
So one of the reasons I was most interested in working on the book was my interest in domestic violence and specifically in intimate partner homicide. We talked already about confrontational homicide as being one of the highest forms and rates of homicide. Intimate partner homicide is also one of the most common, right? Again, while we always say the disclaimer, which is that homicide is relatively rare, right? But in terms of forms of homicide, intimate partner homicide is one that occurs at high rates. In this country, of the homicides where we know who the perpetrator is, 30% of all homicides of women are perpetrated by an intimate partner. 30%. And it's 5% for men. So men who are victims of intimate partner homicide, so 5% of all homicides of men are perpetrated by an intimate partner. What research tells us, we spent a lot of time actually looking into why do intimate relationships escalate and result in a homicide, the most tragic event. Why does that occur? And what research tells us is that if there has been a history of domestic violence, prior domestic violence, that's the biggest indicator that a homicide could result. And so we're looking at why is it that a situation like that escalates to homicide so that we can try to prevent them. And the good thing, I think, is that there's some promising research that suggests that we might be able to intervene and prevent what might just be a violent relationship from escalating to the most serious kind of crime. Yeah.
Interesting. Let me also move on to some of the other things that show up in the news, like it was particularly here in recent days, the terrorism-related homicides. How afraid should we be of that kind of stuff moving forward?
Sure, it's something we cover it at great length in a lot of our courses, our Homeland Security terrorism courses. And another point, just to jump back before I forget it, of course, factors in intimate partner homicide, also presence of firearm, presence of alcohol, and as Kimberly said, previous incident, including threatening the rest of the family as well, and even the pets. With terrorism, notably for most people in this country, the second attack on the Twin Towers, not the one in '93, but 9/11 of 2001 that most people are familiar with, that year the FBI counted all of those deaths of our citizens in the rate and outside of the rate, recognizing that this is a unique situation. 1995, a lot of people will remember the Murrah Federal Building being blown up by Timothy McVeigh as the single, at that time, largest instance of domestic terrorism, which is far more common to have domestic terrorism in the U.S. than it is international terrorism. Public places, the statements by people that if we're going to do something, we're going to do it in a public place. We've seen this in Canada last year, notably the French, of course, and London, et cetera. We are in a better position in the United States because of better work by the various, just not only Homeland Security, but National Security Agency and all the various partners who are involved in monitoring and surveillance and things like that. You can't ever say it won't happen because, again, we're dealing with humans. The Boston Marathon bombing happened the day that happened. Within 20 minutes, I was teaching a graduate terrorism class that semester. I had the whole class online, and we kind of followed along with that for about 3 days to talk about the dynamics as a tragically immediate instance. But again, as Kimberly said, homicide is rare. Homicide as a result of terrorism inside the United States, unbelievably rare. Very, very, very rare. And that's a credit to federal law enforcement, state law enforcement, local law enforcement, a pretty well-informed public. Right. And but always the balancing act between things like the USA Patriot Act, how safe do you want to be? I think of the movie V for Vendetta, versus our rights as citizens and the desire to be a free and independent, in all of our things, as long as we're not hurting somebody else. It's always a balancing act. Terrorism, not a big thing within the U.S. in terms to be afraid of.
There's been the big campaign about see something, say something.
Right.
It's been very effective, yeah.
What causes someone, like I think about like, you know, the situation in Newtown, Connecticut, what causes someone like that just to snap at that level to go in with the massive school shootings, especially another student, another kid, basically? What is it that causes that?
Some of the factors, you know, back to, I don't want to say the confrontational homicide part, but some of the factors in the background. I was bullied, I was having problems, I want to get back at people. One of the things we do know when you look at mass shootings or injuries, so not even necessarily, and think like 4 people or more, not necessarily dead, shot or injured, because if I miss you, if my aim was better, it would have been a murder. So we look at those kind of instances to dispel one of those myths again right up front. Only about 2 out of 10 were diagnosable with a serious mental illness. 1 out of 5, 20%. So it's not the mental illness part, it's the immaturity of the student, it's the revenge factor. Tragically, we saw yesterday UCLA, that may be. Again, I always tell the students, well, let's wait a week or 2 till we get enough or longer to know really what kind of happened there. But some of those mundane revenge, you hurt my feelings, I want to get back at you. The odd part is when somebody says, well, they must be crazy, because in our minds as normal people, we cannot picture taking the life of another person for almost any reason, let alone walking into a school or a place of work and doing something like that.
I have about 2 minutes, and I want to ask this because a lot of people say it's the video games, it's the violent video games, it's the violent movies, you know, that causes these kids to do crazy things.
Right.
Would research back any of that?
Not so far. It certainly has been studied as a kind of a contributing factor, right? But just like we don't say that mental illness causes all of this, we don't believe that violent video games causes it. There have been correlations, and I know we speak to Klebold
and Harris
in the book.
At Columbine and different ones. If you leave your child unattended for 12 hours playing video games, there may be some, you know, aspect of that. It's the balance issue. The, you know, Surgeon General of the U.S. has looked at it every almost decade since the 70s. It's not a cause, but there is a correlation in a constellation of other
factors.
Fascinating conversation. This is a 1-hour conversation, and unfortunately we're out of time. The name of the book is American Homicide. It's geared a little bit more towards the academic world. You think you would ever do something similar to this for the general population?
It's available on Amazon, and it has sold very briskly because of the way we wrote it. You know, today's student wants something that moves along, is kind of fast-paced, you know, which is why it's not an 800-page, you know, dry document that you can't make your way through. But yeah, we have been asked about that. We're working on now one on use of force. But yeah, there's been some questions. Can we make this a real crime and put it in, you know, books of millions? So
thank you so very much. Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Fascinating story. American Homicide is the name of the book. By the way, you can find more of our conversations online at WSRE.org/conversations, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take great care of yourself. We'll see you soon.
Support for this program is provided in part by these corporate sponsors. And by viewers like you.